And we didn't have any respirators or anything like that in those days. So it was starting to move up the wharf, underneath that's where the creosote timbers were. So somebody said, we can't stop it with water. We should blow up the wharf with dynamite. So I got in the city truck and went down to the road foreman's house on C Avenue, just behind us here, to Johnny McPherson. He was the road foreman. He was the only one that had any
Dynamite?
blasting powder or dynamite. So we were in a big panic and banged on the door and woke him up. Johnny, the wharf's on fire. We've got to blow it up. We've got to break it in half to stop it from going up to the top end. And I remember Johnny saying, well, boys, just a minute. You better come in and have a drink while we think this thing over. So one drink led to a couple more. By the time we got back to the wharf, it was no longer, dynamite was no longer needed because the whole wharf was engulfed in flames. While we were gone having the drink, somebody down there decided that the carloads of lumber at the top end of the wharf would catch fire, and then this CPR station would catch fire because of the lumber burning. So they decided they would release the brakes on those cars of lumber, and so they did, and the cars went down the wharf track and hit a boxcar stationed at the bottom of the track and fired it out into the lake, and all the contents, the freight and everything, express, was floating around in Kootenai Lake. I think we did more damage than the fire did. But that was...
Will you tell us where the wharf was?
Well, it's still there. The bottom part of it is still there.
Like our public wharf?
Yes.
By Dick Smith's where he built the boats?
Yeah,
that's right.
There.
Most of it is gone. But you can still see the charred pilings underneath that, what's left of the wharf anyway.
You see
The other major fire, of course, was Front Street, and that was January 1950. According to the ladies in the archives, that was the year that it happened. In that fire, incidentally, where the Kootenai Savings is now and where the hardware store, those two buildings replaced all the structures that were burned. At the top of the street was the Oddfellows Hall. It was a 3-story wooden structure.
So where would that, when you say top of the street, like where Rosewood is?
right across from
At the
Rosewood?
top end of the Kootenai Savings.
Okay.
That's where the Oddfellows Hall was. It was a dance floor on the top floor. Nobody was in the building, so there was no loss of life in this fire. A.L. Grayling was the shoemaker. He had a little shop on the street level, but and his equipment was all lost. Next to the Oddfellows Hall was Morfitt's Hardware, and on the upper floor the Sinclairs had an apartment. Well, we firemen went in there and tried to salvage as much as we could before the fire got to that point. Much of Morfitt's stock was carried across to where the bowling green, or the we call it the bowling green. It's no
Yes.
longer a bowling green.
Where
And
the
we
Saturday
piled-
market is being held right now.
Yeah, we piled all this merchandise in the snowbank. And we tried to get Sinclair's furnishings out of the top, but we got the stove crossways in the doorway and finally decided we had to abandon it. The fire was right on our heels, so we lost most of that. Next door to Morfitt's Hardware was Jack Davis. He had a little taxi office on the street level, and it was he that went down under the floor with a blowtorch to try and thaw out the frozen water lines. And he admitted later that it was he that started the fire under the floor. All these buildings, of course, were wooden structures, and there was no chance that anybody could save there to stop the fire once it got established. And next to that was the arcade. And then next was the post office, and then Eric's Meat Market.
Yeah, yeah.
The post office, of course, is now corner of 5th Street. But once that fire got going, we thought the whole Front Street was gone. So we went into the post office and got out all the mail. And then some genius decided that the fire was coming under these buildings. So we chopped or I didn't, but somebody chopped a big hole in the lobby of the post office and destroyed the floor. And then somebody else threw a bag of mail through one of the big plate glass windows. For what reason, I don't know. Most of the night, Henry Larson, the dairyman, and I spent our efforts on the top of the post office building. And of course, both of us were covered in ice. We were, and that's where the fire stopped. And how we stopped it, I don't know. It just luck, I guess. We thought Eric's Meat Market was gone. The Greyhound bus driver brought the Greyhound bus up Front Street, and all the meat and boxes of butter were carried out of the freezer in Eric's Meat Market, loaded into the bus, quarters of beef and everything we could get our hands on. Fortunately, it was brought back the next morning after the fire was under control. But in the midst of it, our fire chief, Roy Green, decided that the water was running low in a reservoir up the hill, and the pressure was going down. So he telephoned Nelson Fire Department and asked for help. Well, Nelson sent a pumper to Caslow. This pumper had no cab on it, just a wind glass in front of the driver. And those fellows were bundled up, just their eyes uncovered. And when they got to Caslow, they looked like Frosty the Snowman. They were,
Yeah.
and they came flying across 4th Street, it is, to the intersection at the foot of Front Street. And I guess they thought the road continued because they just kept on going right through where the Christmas tree was. Every winter we had a Christmas tree in that open space.
Yes.
Anyway, by this time the fire was under control, so they turned around and went back to Nelson. But we couldn't shut the water off because everything would freeze, so we had left the water running all night. The hoses were pouring water into the ruins.
But those firemen from Nelson must have been
Frozen.
frozen, just
Yeah.
terrible cold.
But those are my 3 memorable experiences with the volunteer fire department in Caslow.
Pretty unbelievable.
Well,
We're getting a new fire truck, do you know?
I saw that in the paper, over $250,000, and I contrast that with the hose reel that we had. After the Second World War, our fire chief decided that we should be mechanized. So it was a city, still a city then, city of Caslow, not a village. The city purchased a surplus war truck, military truck. It was called a power wagon, Dodge Power Wagon. Peebles Motors in Nelson cut the thing in half and stretched it out and put an 8-foot patch in the middle, so the wheelbase was, I don't know how long, it was a weird looking thing. And Roy Green and Bill Hendren built a box on the back to carry the hose, and just behind the driver's seat they put in a steel tank. The idea was to load this with water and then have a pump there to build up pressure for their hoses when they couldn't reach a fire hydrant.